Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. The federal government has implemented something called CyberSecure Canada, a cybersecurity certification program for small and medium-sized enterprises. Let's learn more about this from our guests. Keith Jansa is the Executive Director of the CIO Strategy Council, and Sai Huda is the founder and chairman of CyberCatch, based in Vancouver and San Diego. Welcome to you both.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to be with you.
Keith, maybe start with you, and Sai, also get your perspective on this. What is the state of play with cybercrime and cybersecurity these days?
Well, I can definitely start to note that, given that we're just or through a pandemic, or currently still sitting in one, the shift to online services, to delivery through digital means has certainly increased the number of threat vectors, as well as an increase in the actual cyber breaches and or risks in the marketplace. So there's certainly been very much an increase in cybercrime, and certainly Sai has a number of numbers that he could potentially share with us in regards to that.
Well, we love numbers on this program. So Sai, the baton's over to you. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you again for having us. So clearly there is an increase because the attackers are finding nice pockets of potential victims that just don't have the necessary knowledge or have their shields up. And they know that they are, can attack digitally. All these organizations are working more digitally, as Keith mentioned, and they're accessible easily from the web. So, for example, CyberCatch scanned about 20,000 websites of small and medium organizations in North America, US and Canada. And we found that 8 out of 10 have vulnerabilities on the websites that an attacker can exploit easily from thousands of miles away. And vulnerabilities really mean a bad code on either a website, web application, or a web server, or something that's not configured correctly. But because it's all accessible from the internet, the attackers can scan, like we scan, find these vulnerabilities, and attack and get in. So, that's like 8 out of 10. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing. It's educating everybody.
And Sai, just to follow up on that, it's accelerating due to the shift in attitudes and consumer patterns during and after COVID. Is that right?
Yes, because of COVID, as Keith mentioned, organizations started to operate more digitally because that was the only way to continue to operate. And so people have built more websites, they've expanded their websites, they've offered e-commerce, doing more transactions electronically, and a whole host of organizations, businesses, but also not-for-profit. And so because of that, they're just more of a larger attack surface, if you will, for the attackers, more potential victims. And because people have rushed into it, not really thinking about security, which I'm sure we'll get into more details here, it's just more opportunity for the bad guys.
Keith, turning to you, is this cyber certification program necessary then?
Absolutely. It's specifically targeted towards small, medium enterprises, so those with less than 500 employees, and specifically targeting the small, medium enterprise, given how integrated small, medium enterprises are within the supply chain. So as much as it's targeted to those organizations, it certainly has implications for the larger organizations that receive products, services, or goods from these small, medium enterprises to their respective businesses. And ultimately, if there's any sort of broken link in that chain, when it comes to cybersecurity, it could potentially be a detriment to the small, medium enterprise, but also across that supply chain in relation to the data that potentially is being breached and exploited. So as much as it's targeted at the small and medium enterprise, it certainly has larger implications across organizations. The other thing with respect to the program being necessary, small, medium organizations, as you can imagine, especially micro businesses of 5 or less, don't necessarily have the resources nor the expertise and capacity to be able to address these highly technical areas to ensure that there are no doors open
Right.
for any particular breach.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum with our two guests, Keith Jansa and Sai Huda, talking about cybersecurity. We've got this new program called, or just implemented, called CyberSecure Canada. So, Keith and Sai, how does this program work and how does it help?
So the program was in a pilot phase for a few years, ultimately gathering experience results and being able to grow the awareness that small medium enterprises need to elevate their cyber posture. And the program is meant for any small medium enterprise to ultimately have a stamp from the federal government indicating that the organization has implemented cybersecurity controls that elevate their cyber posture. It's a program that's being implemented through Innovation, Science, Economic Development with the help and support from Standards Council of Canada, who is a national accreditation body accrediting cybersecurity certification bodies to audit and ensure that the appropriate controls are in place for these small medium enterprises. So as much as there's controls for small medium enterprises and ensuring those controls are in place, there's also through the system and the certification program, where in which those that are certifying as well are meeting appropriate controls to ensure that we can trust and have confidence in small medium enterprises that have implemented these controls to begin with.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Sai, what's your perspective on this?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I was honored to personally have the privilege of being part of the team that authored the new standard that Keith was mentioning, CAN CISC 104. And it's called the Baseline Cybersecurity Controls for Small and Medium Organizations. And it actually is something that Canada should be very proud of. And Cyber Strategy Council, with Keith's leadership, did a great job. It's the first standard of its kind in the world, Tony. And specifically, as Keith mentioned, really making sure that small and medium organizations, who are the backbone of our economy, are really secure. And because they could be the gateway in also to the large organizations. So what we did was we took a look at all the different standards and requirements out there in the world, and we picked best of the best. And so this new standard has 55 controls, prevention, detection, response categories. And we hand selected meticulously those that we felt were easy to implement, but effective. And so that's what the standard does. It prescribes up to 55 controls for a small and medium organization to implement. And the other thing we've done is we have partnered together. So CIO Strategy Council and CyberCatch have partnered together to put together a solution called Compliance Manager. It's a one-stop shop, very affordable for small and medium organizations. We have a team of cybersecurity experts that quickly guide the small business to see what they have today, identify the gaps, create the attack plan, attack surface map plan, so we know what the attackers are going to see, and then we have implemented all the controls, and then we continuously test those controls to make sure that they stay compliant. And so that's how we're getting them secure and safe. So it's really a very exciting opportunity and very innovative the way we're approaching it in Canada.
So would you say, and back to you, Sai, just for a second, you're obviously working, if you've got offices in Vancouver and San Diego, you're working both sides of the border. So is Canada ahead on this, or are we falling behind in some areas? How are we doing?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, if you will, Tony. So on one hand, this is an area where Canada is ahead compared to the US and other countries, because this is the first standard of its kind that specifically focuses on the supply chain, which is comprised primarily of small and medium organizations, as Keith mentioned earlier, and prescribes specifically a roadmap of how to get secure. So that's a leadership. That's first of its kind. But on the other hand, in general, we do need to do a better job, collectively to educate everybody in Canada about the fact that the threats are increasing. And so a lot of organizations are a little bit behind, and that's where the standard will be helpful because it lays out a roadmap. And together, like with your show, thank you for having us, we're getting the awareness out and making everybody aware that there is a roadmap, there's a way to get secure.
For sure. We've got just a half a minute before the break, but let's get started on this topic. You mentioned it, Sai. The threats are increasing. So maybe Keith, you can. I'm gonna ask this now, and then you're gonna answer after the break because we're running out of time a little bit. But really want to know how are the threats increasing and what the economic impact of that is, because this is a show about the economics of things, not just cyber in and of itself. So that'll be the question to Keith after the break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back here at Boom and Bust with our two guests, Keith Jansa and Sai Huda, talking about cybersecurity. Just before the break, I wanted to know about the trends in cybercrime and the economic impact. We're going to allow both our guests to give us their perspectives. Keith, why don't you start us off?
Well, I think from an economics point of view, it's not surprising when you consider just one example like ransomware, where literally your organization is held hostage. It can't access its assets, whether it's the data or otherwise. There's countless articles in the news of whether it's a hospital breach, whether it's a organization that manages websites breach, that's ultimately, when you consider the economics of ransomware, well, what's that dollar figure, right? It can be, oh, I'll unlock your data, but for $1 million. And you're having to actually fulfill that transaction in order to have your assets, your data assets back in play. So it's astronomically steep with respect to being held hostage in a case like a ransomware, of which, when you consider things like website vulnerabilities, where these things come into play, where there's some pretty simple controls to be able to put in place to avoid those kinds of circumstances. So I'm just looking at it in terms of response from a micro level, just with respect to a business. A cyber attack, especially for a small medium enterprise, it could close their operations. Simply because they don't have the revenue nor the funding to be able to, in fact, meet any sort of ransomware attack.
Sai, what's your perspective?
Yeah, just to add to that, Keith said it so well, but some metrics here that everyone should be aware of. So per IBM's cost of a data breach study, which they do every year, it costs about $3 million for a small and medium organization to try to recover from a data breach. Very significant for a small and medium organization, $3 million. That's a metric to be aware of. The other one is that CyberCatch surveyed about 1,200 small and medium organizations in North America and said, how long would you be able to sustain a ransomware attack? 75% said they would only be able to survive 3 to 7 days. So that's very significant. The other thing to note is that according to IBM also, there's really 76% of how the attackers get in are from the website, the vulnerabilities, or through phishing. So that's over 3/4. And so, it's really knowing these techniques and these metrics and then saying, okay, how can we defend properly? And so that's what we've done with the standard, is put together these 55 controls that enable good defense. So for example, one of the controls that's required in the standard is to scan your websites regularly, to look for vulnerabilities and fix them. The other one is to make your employees aware of phishing, but also to test them regularly to make sure they're not going to fall victim. And the other one is to test controls. So all those are actually controls that are in the standard that'll help with the good defense, and our compliance manager solution enables all of that and continuously. So that's where innovation comes in to help solve this problem.
So, Sai, just so I understand, then as part of this certification program, basically it's a familiarity with the do's and don'ts, if I can put it that way. Is that right?
Well, the certification program is essentially saying adopt the standard, CAN-CIC 104, and make sure you stay compliant, and then have a third party come in and verify that you are in compliance. So what we do with our compliance manager solution in partnership with CIO Strategy Council is provide a solution that enables adoption of the standard very easily, quickly, affordably. and then we automatically, continuously make sure they're compliant. And so when a third party comes in, it's very easy for the assessment to be complete, to say, yep, they've got the controls in place, it's being tested, they're finding issues, they're fixing them. Okay, they deserve that certification.
The other thing
Keith?
to note, yeah, Tony, the other thing to note is that because in many ways, an organization having that stamp from the federal government in relation to being cyber secure, it actually provides opportunities for small medium enterprises to export and to broaden their marketplace, because there's a reputation within Canada with respect to the brand, and ultimately the fact that a federal entity has said, well, they've done all the checks and balances when it comes to being cyber secure. And that certainly goes a long way internationally when you're trying to sell products to other places where you have a government that's ultimately backing in many ways your operations.
For sure. We're going to continue with our guests after a short break. We'll be back after that break. Please stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, and we've got our special guests on cybersecurity, Keith Jansa. He's an executive director of CIO Strategy Council, and Sai Huda is with us as well. He's the founder, chairman, CEO of CyberCatch. Keith, start with you. As we're talking about cybersecurity, the thought came to me about we've also got to protect against malevolent state actors. I'm thinking about China, Russia, North Korea. Is that one of your concerns as well?
Absolutely. The threat vectors and threat actors have exponentially increased, and to a point when you consider the pandemic and the ramifications of supply chains, where the small medium enterprise is so integrated into that. So yes, whether it's China or Russia or any actor, it is extremely important that we ensure controls are in place to ensure that our economy remains competitive, and ultimately that the well-being of Canadians is maintained.
Sai, what's your perspective on this?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that the motive for these threat actors that are nation states is slightly different. And therefore, it makes it more complicated in terms of trying to defend. So, for example, for China, it's really not financial, it's really competitive. And so they're going to go after certain segments, like manufacturing, for example, in Canada, because Canadian manufacturing is, as Keith was alluding to, world class. There's a lot of intellectual property, and it impacts the economy big time. So they're going to want to get into these small and medium-sized organizations that are manufacturers and essentially steal the IP or cause havoc so that it shuts down, and therefore it starts to cripple the economy. For Russia, it's really more nefarious because they actually want to stop things or really cause pain. So they're going to go after certain other segments, perhaps like infrastructure, if you will. North Korea, Iran, out of the big four, they're more financial, especially North Korea, cash starved. So they're going to try to use more ransomware and really get money, if you will. Same thing with Iran. So different motives, but those are the big four that we all have to be aware of. And they're definitely targeting Canadian organizations. So we all have to have our guard up and really implement the standard.
Keith, can the government do more? Is there more to do in this area?
Absolutely. We talk economics. Consider that big price tag to unlock your data that you're housing. If we consider the government's role, not only in being able to say, yes, these organizations are doing the right things, but the type of investment from the government to help support organizations to become cyber secure can go a long way, because that investment is by far a fraction of the costs of potentially one or two ransomware attacks. So this is something where I believe the government does have a role to play, given that we have talked about the capacity issues, the expertise issues, and it's great to have solutions like what CyberCatch is providing in partnership with us with respect to giving access to expertise to small and medium enterprises to be able to implement these controls. but it also requires resources and funding to be able to implement them. So anything the government can do with respect to providing, whether it's a tax break with respect to you implement cyber controls, you get a break on your taxes, and or for the the other segment of small medium enterprises, your not-for-profit organizations. Maybe there's a specific grant for those organizations to be able to implement cybersecurity controls. The more we can do proactively, definitely from an economics point of view, sheer economics point of view, we're gonna end up in front.
Sai, we've got about 20 seconds. Your bottom line, can the government do more, yes or no?
Yes, absolutely, they can do more. Provide financial incentives, but also, add into the law the standard. So there's the bill C-26 in the House of Commons right now, which is focused more on infrastructure organizations. I think they should add the standard in there and say everybody should implement the standard.
Implement the standard. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your addition to this program. It's been great having you, and we wish you well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another interesting discussion there with two very special guests. Really knew a lot about cybersecurity and cybercrime, how it affects you, your household, perhaps your business. But there is much more that can be done and is being done. Thanks for watching today. We'll see you next time.